With a front squat, we're going to focus on a front squat first, because in my perspective, a front squat, actually not even in my perspective, it's actually a fact. When you do a front squat as opposed to a back squat, for one, if somebody has shoulder issues or they have a kyphotic issue when they're actually pulled forward like this right here inhibits me from going to a good squat position. And here's the reason why. If I set my hands here and I come forward to a squat position and I don't have the mobility or the retraction ability of my shoulders, it's going to be very painful on my shoulders to begin with. So I can't necessarily get myself underneath the bar if I'm already trapped in here, right? So I don't have enough extension to be able to roll those shoulders back to get myself in a good position. So if you have a client that has shoulders really full, really rolled forward, it's important to really think about, okay, if this is going to be causing issues as far as a shoulder complex in its own, and they're not prepared for it, maybe a back squat may not be the best idea, okay? Now the difference between a back squat and a front squat, I'll tell you how over here, okay? So a front squat is going to focus on more forces around your thoracic area, right? Because when you set your hands on a bar and you drive the elbows up, so just move the elbows here, right? Drive the elbows up. If you can tell, as soon as she brings those elbows up into position, it naturally goes into extension here, right? So that's automatically what's happening here. And at the same time, if I'm going to go into a squat, as soon as you start moving down towards the squat angle, the rib cage has to be braced. You have to really brace the core to really go into a full depth squat from that position, right? As opposed to a back squat, if you're coming onto the bar on the side here, right? I set the bar here, right? And as I'm going to a squat itself, just because the weight's back here, whatever weight distribution that I originally had in the front end is being distributed more towards this section here, okay? So they're both compressive forces, a front squat and a back squat. But a front squat, because of the position and where the bar is actually placed, because the bar is now up front, now that tension, now the weight of the bar, the mass of the weight's trying to pull me forward. So because the weight's trying to pull me forward and I'm counteracting that force by driving the elbows up, I'm creating more of an extension factor. So whatever tension I had here from the back squat position is brought up here now, okay? So very important to understand that, because in a sense, it could save you a lot of headache as far as like finding yourself in a situation where if a person had, if you find yourself in a situation in which you're coming to a back squat and you didn't really make the right assessment as far as a person not having shoulder mobility for a back squat, and they come in here and they start complaining about shoulder issues, it throws off your whole vibe, right? As opposed to coming in like, okay, so the reason why I'm going to go into a front squat approach is because currently you find yourself in this state. A front squat is still going to focus on working on the legs, but I'm going to focus more on creating that nice thoracic extension to begin with. So we focus on a good pattern. And then once you start getting better at that and you start executing it, then we can start moving forward into other bigger movements. Okay? So that towel technique that I showed you guys before, as far as like breaking down the process, that's important once again, because whatever we talked about as far as the hip and the shoulder very much mirror each other. Okay? So that external rotation, that pinky tension, is once again still the torque effect, right? So I'm going to go back into the same breakdown again, okay? So if I take my fist, okay, my fist representing the ball and socket joint of the shoulder complex, okay? So the head of the, what bone is in my arm? The humerus, right? The head of the humerus. And it sits into what? Yeah, so no, so it sits into the shoulder complex. The glenohumeral joint, yeah? So if it sits in there, it's like, think of the visual effect of a, let's see, a golf ball and a golf ball tee, right? Extremely mobile, right? As opposed to, for example, the hip socket, it's still mobile, but it's got to be a lot more dense. It's got to be a lot more supported, right? So the shoulder has the same effect or same breakdown, but it's much more mobile because you don't have to hold as much weight as an example, right? All the hips, there's a lot more to go that goes behind it. But either way, it doesn't matter. The structural aspect of it is very similar. So the head of the humerus sits into the glenohumeral joint, right? And it's the same thing. You have tissue surrounding it. You have muscular tissue. You have ligaments, tendons, fascial tissue that surrounds it. If I just move my arm around, it's very very limber, doesn't do very much, right? But if I create torque, by creating that twisting action, right? I'm creating a support system to work off of, okay? So that's a good thing to kind of think about as far as the front squat's concerned. So what I love about the front squat is when you get yourself set up here, you got your hands set up on the bar, about shoulder width apart. As you come forward into a front squat position, and drive the elbows forward and up, you're literally doing the same thing. If you think about it, you're doing the same thing as this, as any other motion that involves that torque effect, right? So because I set my hands or my fingers on the outside of the shoulder, as I bring my elbows in and up, I'm literally creating that external rotation of that shoulder there, right? So as I'm coming through, the elbows are not going to be out from that position there. They need to be in and up. If I bring the elbows to the inside, I have much more torque as opposed to out here. Out here, there's very minimal support, right? So, have you hop on over here, Sarah? I want you to palpate my lat here and let me know if you feel any good tension on this, okay? So, got your setup, and if I come through, in and up, you should feel pretty good tension right across the lat there, right? Yeah. Before I even do anything. So me just holding the elbows in and up, there's a lot of torque taking place, right? Just by holding that setup there. Now imagine as I go into a squat. As soon as I go into a squat, as I set up here, I'm going to think about driving those elbows up. So as I drive those elbows up, I'm accentuating that torque effect of the shoulders as I go through the motions by driving those elbows up. Just that constant tension, right? So as I go down into a squat, automatically what my natural intonation is going to be is to let the elbows drop. Natural mindset to do, right? Because the weight's pulling you down. But if I drive the elbows up, I'm creating the same effect as this is doing here, right? So imagine this complex here on the actual hook here. That's literally what I'm recreating with my shoulder, right? That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm creating basically the bookshelf effect, right? So if you look at a bookshelf that holds all these books in place, it's just that little nugget, that little section right there that's holding all the weight. There's literally like one little pin that's actually holding a bookshelf in place. So what you're doing is you're creating a natural bookshelf effect on a front squat. Interesting setup, right? So, and here's the thing, let's go to put a 25 on this. The thing about this is that a front squat, in my perspective, is almost in some ways even more effective than a back squat. Because first and foremost, you're tapping into thoracic extension. A lot of us naturally miss that because we're sitting down. If I'm sitting down in front of a computer all day and I'm doing this setup here, right? I'm already in this position here, okay? I've already got a tight hip flexor position, okay? So we talked about the hip flexor before, right? So for example, the hip flexor attaches here, your lower lumbar. And then what it does is it comes across and attaches to your lesser trochanter on your femur, okay? So literally, it crosses over. So imagine this towel being in my lower back, and it comes forward, and it attaches on my hip, okay? That's the visual effect of the hip flexor, right? And it crosses the hip. So if I'm sitting down all day in this position here, what's happening to the hip flexor?
It's just constantly flexed.
It's constantly in that flex position, right? And we've all taken that long ride, driving across country or maybe driving to Southern California where it's like 4 or 5 hour drive. And you're sitting there, you're having a good time, singing along or whatever, right? And you stop to go to the restroom. And you get up. And as you get up, you're like, oh my God, it's tight, right? So for one, yes, it's the quads being tight, but it's the hip flexor from being in this engaged position the whole time. And I come up, and as I come through, this is so tight that I literally, my butt is sticking out because it's so tight. It takes a little bit for that hip flexor to reciprocate with that setup, right? So that's one factor that I want to think about, right? So back squats and front squats, that is isolating that situation there, right? But the reason why I consider a front squat to be that much more powerful is because as I'm going into a squat, I'm tapping into that thoracic extension. So if you look at this here, I got my setup, Everything as far as the cues that we went into the other day still applies. Corkscrew set up at the thighs, getting the hips underneath me here, right? Keeping that upright position. So automatically before I go anywhere on this, I've got the elbows, the hands on the outside of the shoulders. So with the hands on the outside of the shoulders, it allows me to basically isolate that external rotation by bringing the elbows to the inside. If I have the hands here, there's not a lot of torque taking place, right? So it's counterintuitive. By having the hands on the outside, as so, boom, by bringing the elbows in and up, I'm automatically creating that torque effect, right? So I've got my setup, sitting up nice and tall. I'm gonna drive the elbows up. So that's my initial point. Now, if I notice that my client is here, it's either they don't understand the pattern or their lats are way too tight to create that front sweat effect. So I need to keep that in mind, right? So I've got my setup here. Now, if you look at the elbows, as I come down into the squat here, the elbows have to drive up, okay? So first and foremost, I got my setup, corkscrew setup with the thighs, taking a breath in, driving the elbows up, and then pulling myself into that squat as I come through that motion. Tension up top, driving the elbows up. Automatically, I'm gonna drive the elbows up, pull myself into that squat as I come through. So if you want to get the side angle here, Katie. So if you look at this setup here, as soon as I drive the elbows up, you can see the thoracic has to fight for position the lower I get into position, right? So I have to really focus on keeping that upright position as we go through that motion there, okay? Now it's very subtle because the lower I go, the more my body wants to go forward. So naturally, the elbows look like they're neutral the whole time. But I'm fighting for position the whole time by driving those elbows up as I go through that motion. So there's a lot of subtleties going on. Because of me having to think about that pattern as I'm going through, technically, I'm tapping into a lot of complexities here. If you think about it, what are the complexities that I'm tapping into here? And by complexities, I mean like cueing things, right? So, as a trainer, what are we thinking? Like we should have done our due diligence as far as teaching all the mechanics of the things before we got into the weight, right? So we went into the squat the other day with a plate. Nothing special behind it, but I wanted to make it a point to send a message home is when you're doing a squat, I don't want this stuff going on. You see that? I don't want a shearing force in a squat, which is the whole point of what we talked about a second ago. A squat should be a compressive force, not a shearing force. If I'm going into a squat pattern, let's have you hold this up here, like this. This is, I want to get as close as I can to that gravitational pull, right? I want to get in that upright position as much as I can, right? So, because of the weight being in front of me on the front squat, and I'm having to drive those elbows up, I have to have even more of an upright position than, for example, a back squat. Because a back squat, I have a little bit of movement forward as I'm going through. So a back squat, you're gonna have a little bit, if you wanna get technical, you're gonna have a little bit of forward action as opposed to a front squat, okay? Does that make sense? Okay? So that's the reason why I'm a big advocate of a front squat as opposed to a back squat. Now, a con of a front squat is that you do have more the front heavy situation going on. So because of the front heaviness situation going on, you're gonna have more quads on a front squat. So that's, for example, a quote unquote a con of a front squat, right? The pro of a back squat is you get more glutes in the back end of the picture. So it's more of a glute dominant pattern for a back squat. You're still gonna get quite a bit of glute on a front squat, but you're gonna get a little more predominantly the front side. Okay? That makes sense? Also, keeping in mind the depth of the squat, okay? The lower the squat is, the more disciplined I need to be as far as having the upright position, okay? So I'm gonna give you guys an example. So right now I have 6 risers on this bad boy here, and I want you guys to see the contrast here. So I'll have you use the PVC cup as an example to see what's going on, okay? So, by the way, the finger position that I have going on here, that's if the person does not have wrist problems. If a person has wrist issues, I may actually use a towel, and I'll show you guys that here in a second. So So this is the contrast of doing 6 risers as opposed to 5 risers or 4 risers, right? So I'll just do 2 reps a piece here. So I want you guys to appreciate the contrast of the setup here. So corkscrew setup of the thighs, chin towards the spine, elbows in and up, and I'm gonna pull myself into the squat as I drive the elbows up. Clenching up top, always have to clench up top. If you end up here, that's not a finished squat. I want you to clench the hips up top, knees are softly ending the movement. So pull yourself into the squat. Nice into it. All right, Sarah, go ahead and take one of those risers off for me real quick. So that's the contrast of a little bit of a higher depth, right? Watch the lower I go, the more I'm forced to tap into thoracic extension, right? So you got my setup. Position. Toes are slightly pointing out. Corkscrew setup, elbows in and up. Roll myself into that squat. Am I forced to be more upright on this, guys?
No. Or yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, so a little bit more upright, right? Interesting, so let's bring it down one more notch. Keeping in mind that the person's progressively attuned to this situation. This is not gonna happen in one shot. This is on, you know, months upon months, sometimes even a course of a year to like get that set up here, right? So get the thoracic extension here, Jamie. So let's see if I can get that upright position here. Is there a difference? Okay, corkscrew, and this is 10 times more challenging. So now I'm having to tap into a lot more east and west approach of the hips. That discipline needs to be on point, and that thoracic extension needs to be even better. And as tempted as I may be to be leaning forward, I cannot afford to do that. Right?
Well, because the further away you bring out the weight from the center of gravity, you're gonna fall forward.
Exactly.
So,
right?
yeah.
So if I'm asking to go deeper into the squat, I damn well better have hip external rotation. I better have good accessing of the glutes. And I damn well better have great thoracic extension to get to that lower depth, right? So it's not about strength. In this example, yes, strength is a big factor, absolutely. But without mobility, this would not be accessible, okay? So this is where some of us tend to mess up on. We go too much into heavy lifting and less into mobility work. So the mobility stuff that we've been doing, the flossing techniques, the different hip patterns, all these different movements are emphasizing on trying to create better accessing of the tissue. So you don't want to go into heavier lifting unless you're actually accessing the tissue first, right? And the way you're going to access the tissue is to create mobility prior to the addition of the extra mass. Make sense? Okay. Now, with a back squat, let's see if there's a contrast there, right? So just for reference point here, I'm setting my hands about shoulder width apart. I always step back so I can get a good sense of the distance here, right? And if I'm here, I'm able to basically be centered right off the bat. So I use the little rings there. I'm going to just lifting 101. I'm going to set the, there's 2 different portions. For a back squat, you can either sit it in a high position or a low position. Whatever you're more comfortable with it, right? It really depends on the length of the person's torso. If somebody has a really long torso, it's probably okay to sit it down a little lower. Now, here's the issue with that. If you bring it down fairly low on the traps, you're falling into a potential risk. And what is that? It falls off, it slides off, right? So I prefer to have them set it up right over the traps, right? So let's see if there's a subtle shift in the squat pattern here, right? So I've got my setup, clenching the quads and the glutes. So in this situation, I need to really emphasize on, once again, setting those elbows underneath. So by setting those elbows underneath, what am I doing once again?
Give that bookshelf effect.
Hitting that bookshelf effect. I'm really creating that nice tension here. What I don't want to see, guys, is doing a squat where the person is they're just letting the bar just hang out there. The bar should never be hanging out there. I'm creating tension. I'm pulling that bar down on my body. And I'm creating those elbows to the inside because that creates support. So there's plenty of force taken in as far as the external rotation of the elbows. I'm keeping my chin towards my spine, and I'm creating plenty of tension down up against my traps. So I'm never just relaxing. And the PVC pipe really helps illustrate that. I'm creating tension to the inside, right? So with that setup there, right off the bat, I'm tapping into the 1 unit effect. Both patterns incorporate the 1 unit effect. Front squat, tension. Shoulders should be connected to the trunk. Okay? That is where the whole concept of the torque comes in, because when I create torque at the shoulder, when I create torque at the hip, I'm basically connecting those limbs, those moving limbs that are moving all over the place, to my trunk. And the trunk is connected to my shoulder, the trunk is connected to my hips, right? Unless I'm doing something else or I'm not lifting something heavy, I should probably be having those bad boys engaged, right? So I've got my setup. Let's see if there's any contrast in the back squat on this, right? Elbows in, plenty tension, corkscrew. Keep myself upright as much as I can. I'm gonna bring down the box there, Sarah. Bring it down a notch. See if there's a difference here. Do I go forward a little bit, or do I keep myself in an upright position? Let's check out the seat. A little bit more to lean forward on this, right? Okay, bring it down one more notch there, Sarah. I'm still fighting for position here. I'm still trying to keep myself as upright as I can, but the bar is a little bit more different now, okay? So that tension is now being set where? Specifically?
Predominantly on the back.
Predominantly glutes and back, right? More the back end. Oh shit, that was low. So I'm having to access a lot more core off of this position here. I'm having to access more east and west approach to the thighs, and I damn well better keep that position on the shoulders. Do I look like I'm leaning forward more on this, guys? A little bit more, right?
Yeah.
Your knees are way more exaggerated.
What's that?
Your knees are way more exaggerated. Like
Yeah. So, subtleties that happen in the squat, right? So, that's where, for example, if you think I'm BSing on, emphasizing on the east and west approach, try going down that depth with your legs like this. That won't happen, right? You're gonna be off balance. So, you're not able to achieve that depth if you don't have great hip understanding, okay? So, understanding that prior to going into a training session I cannot elaborate more on how important that is to understand that, because that helps you not only create value for yourself, but keep them in a safe position as they're going through the motions. Okay? So
also the east and west thing, if I don't do that, then I end up trying to use my knees. Sometimes my knees will come inside, which I see a lot of other people do. So that's like a good visual.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if I'm not doing the east and west, so if you look at this, if I'm set up here, east and west, two things for the east and west approach. I'm creating torque at the hip itself, at the hip complex. Two, I'm creating a pattern where it should be focusing on. So if you let me see that PVC back for a second. So instead of the line being here, without a corkscrew setup, right? If I create a corkscrew setup, look at the knees. Now this is going to be the line that's going to be going towards. Completely different than here and here. So if I have knee valgus going for me, and I'm doing a squat from here, I have more of a chance for the knee pattern to be going in if my knees are facing this way, right? I have more of a chance to have the tension going towards my quads specifically and my kneecaps, right? So do I want to be, yeah, the knees need to be involved, but I want to take as much stress away from the knees as I can, because this is the powerhouse. This right here is the powerhouse. This here gets the most torture during the squat and during a front squat and a back squat. Even a deadlift if you're not doing it right. A deadlift will actually be emphasizing more on the lower back if you're not doing it right, because you're not hinging into the setup here, right? So as far as hand positions for the front squat, there's a couple different variations. One, this is going to be quote unquote the most advanced. When you set the hands, go to watch the hands here. So if you set the hands here, right, this will be the most advanced. So I've got the hands here, and then I'm going to bring the elbows to the inside, right? So that's more of a simple setup. The hands, should be just there to kind of hook yourself in. You're really focused on the shoulder, the torque. With the hands hooked in here, the weight itself is helping me create the torque at the shoulder, right? Now, if I use towels as an example, so if I take towels, all I'm doing is I'm taking each end of the towel, do a little twisting action, set it on the side of the bar here, and I'm basically, for me, I like to use the rule of thumb of just sitting on the inside of the ring, just because that way I know that it's always going to be in the same spot. And nobody really has such wide shoulders that they're outside the ring anyways, right? Unless you're like a professional football player, then okay, I'll take it back, right? So I'm gonna set my hands fairly snug up against the towel, and then as I come through, I'm gonna let the towel kind of create some tension here, right? So the beauty of this is as I come forward, I'm just gonna use my index finger and thumb. I'm not using my whole grip position. The whole purpose of the towel is so that way you take the tension away from the wrist. Because if I'm using my fingers, there's a lot of wrist extension, right? So if somebody has wrist problems, that doesn't mean you have to cut out the front squat. You can use a towel, right? So you got your setup, same thing, elbows in and up. Now you have an extension of your wrist, right? And I'm just using my thumb and index finger. Once again, the whole purpose of this hook position is to help assist the, to allow the weight to create that torque for you, right? So that's another version of setting that up. Another version is using your thumbs. So you set your thumbs underneath the bar. So you've got your setup here, on the outside of the, so you can set it up here, right? On the inside. I personally never really use this, but I mean, you can have a different variance there. And you still got that elbows to the inside, right? From that position there. Another version, I like to call this one the bodybuilder one, okay? If a person has such build-up shoulders, such lack of mobility as a quote-unquote bodybuilder, then tap into this setup here, right? And you're just basically doing the genie pose position, okay? The only issue with these movements here, guys, or these positions for a front squat, is that you don't have the bookshelf approach anymore. Because now you're just holding it with your shoulders from here. So if I'm just holding it with my shoulders, I have zero assistance as far as creating this same situation. So in a sense, the weight is sitting on me just about the same, but I'm having to rely on my shoulder strength and core strength, as opposed to creating a little bit of a quote-unquote cheat sheet and shoulder, using my natural musculature and ligaments and tendons and fascial tissue to assist me in holding that weight, right?
So even if, so say you put your thumbs right here, will that still won't cause a bookshelf effect?
It's still not going to cause the bookshelf effect, because think of it like this. I'll give you a visual here. The lat attaches here, right? So it attaches here. Just put your fingers here for a second. So it attaches here, and then it comes down, and then it attaches right at my lower back. That's so, right? So that's kind of the setup for a lat, right? So if I'm set up here, and I'm just setting the weight on my shoulders, that's not creating so much more, right? As opposed to keep the hand there, as opposed to sitting it up there. And as I bring the hand, the fingers here, as they come across, just by me holding on to the setup here, that creates natural tension on my musculature, because I'm hooking up. As opposed to if I'm just doing this, there's no tension going on.
I see.
Right?
I see.
So it's just taking the understanding of our anatomy and physiology and natural structure. It allows you to better understand like how you can create hook points to assist in a movement pattern, right? So not only is this interesting for us, but at the same time, seeing it in action and feeling it in action, it gets exciting a little bit, right? So same thing with this. Your transverse abdominis, right? This whole section here. As I'm going into a front squat, let's take this whole section here. I'm having to tap into extension. As I'm tapping into extension, this is trying to pull me forward, right? But because I'm driving this upwards, the lower I go into the squat, the more this is trying to pull me forward, right? But because of that natural extra tension from that torque, the shelf approach, it's counteracting that transverse abdominis tension that's pulling me forward. So literally a front squat is counteracting this whole sitting position that you've been doing all day.
Right.
This has been working all day. Why do I care about working that transverse abdominis or getting it tighter than it should be? I want to stretch that baby out. So literally a front squat helps you stretch out your transverse abdominis at the same time, simultaneously. Very powerful movement. I couldn't emphasize more on that, right? Now, does it have to be a barbell front squat? No. You could do a goblet squat, okay? Squat. You got a different setup, okay? So for one, I would say that the first approach should be double hand position, okay? So bottoms up, as so. So hold on to the little guy like this. Now, if you try to get your client to hold it like this is very challenging because you're having to grip it, and this adds more complexity to the pattern than you really want. You're having to work on gripping, your shoulders are gonna take over. As opposed to this, I'm tapping into a little bit of my bookshelf approach, right? Because I have it here. So as I'm going into a squat, once again, corkscrew set up with the elbows, keep my chin towards my spine. If you want to basically give a nice little pre-cue here, right? If you want to do like a verbal prompting, right? So anchoring of the cue that you're going to talk about. So you can go into the whole emphasis of like, okay, I want you to bring your chin to your spine, tuck it in a little bit, cool. Just say triple chin. Create a triple chin approach. So kind of like a triple chin. So when I say triple chin, just pull your chin back, okay? So get my setup, corkscrew, I'm gonna pull myself into that squat. And I'm never just slamming my butt up against the block. I'm actually just slightly tapping. I'm gonna take one of those risers off there, James. So corkscrew, and then pull yourself into that spot. Make it a point to keep yourself as upright as you can as you're going through this. And this is literally the same thing as a front squat. You're keeping that upright position as much as you can. Tap into those hips going east and west, right? If the person is not able to do that, that shows you an area of opportunity for that person. Hip external rotation. So I'm noticing that you're not able to bring the hips out. What I'm going to focus on is in between that set, why don't we go and work on some mobility work in between that set, right? So that's where, for example, understanding that, hey, this is an area of opportunity. Doesn't mean you have to do all lifting in one workout. You can say, okay, so I'm noticing something here. Let's see if we can make that better. So you become a practitioner is the idea. Don't think of yourself as a trainer. Think of yourself as a coach / a practitioner, okay? Because as I'm noticing things, nobody's gonna be perfect. You're used to doing sometimes decades of doing whatever the heck you've been doing, and I'm not gonna be able to change your whole life in one interaction, but I'm definitely gonna give my best, right? So in this example here, so that was the simpler version. When I get a little more advanced, do a double setup, okay? So the double setup, first and foremost, I wanna have my hand on the inside curvature of the kettlebell, okay? Because if I have my hand on the inside curvature of the kettlebell, it sits better on my hand and my forearms here, right? So when I've got my setup, I'm gonna pop it back, set up against my chest, forearm, and bicep. I want it snug. I don't want this. This is not good for the shoulder. Keep it snug, right? Now from here, showing you the front version first. Corkscrew setup, chin towards the spine, toes slightly pointed out, east and west. If they're not able to achieve the full setup, you can have them go a little bit wider for now, but futuristically speaking, I wanted to get them a little closer. Because this is a false range of motion. This is a false squat, okay? Same thing with this setup here. Upright, corkscrew, pull myself into that squat, east and west. Always get the hips underneath you at the top. So that's a second version, right? If the person's not that strong, don't go super heavy on the kettlebells, okay? Now, anti-rotation approach. Now you're adding additional forces to one side. Your body naturally wants to do this. You're having to fight that. So now you're adding a complexity factor to that squat, right? So my body wants to go that way, but I have to make it a point to keep myself upright. In this example, I will use my opposite hand to offset that. And if you notice, look at the kettlebell. As I come back, does it stay there or does it move up?
Moves up.
Same thing as a front squat, right? Set up, corkscrew. And I like to reach because it's going to help me offset. But how does this relate to what we did in the very beginning with a 10-pound plate?
It keeps the external rotation.
It's the same effect as quote unquote the 10-pound plate that I was using earlier, only now I'm not using weight, but it's helping me offset myself. Right? So a lot of factors going on in this one today.